Was that you? Are
Unfortunately.
you heckling me?
Yeah.
Wow. I will say, this is one of my all-time favorite films. Back about 25 years ago, in the UK, they experimented with something called National Cinema Day, which is now an international thing, where every movie in every cinema was free at that time. Now there's a nominal charge. I think in North America it's $4. And I went to my local multiplex, and one of the screens at that local multiplex was showing a subtitled film as part of National Cinema Day. And it was Jack Demme's The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And it was one of the best experiences cinema going in my life to see The Umbrellas of Cherbourg in a completely sold out free screening with 200 people, probably 150 of whom had no idea that they were going to be watching a French musical from the 1960s. And you could just feel, first, the bewilderment, because that entire film is sung, and then the emotion, because the film worked its magic, and everybody became a Jack Demme fan out of the blue. It was a transcendent moment, and Young Girls of Rochefort was even better. So if you haven't seen it before, this is going to be quite something. That is all I am going to say, except I will admit that tomorrow's programming here at the VIFF Center was initially planned for National Cinema Day with that in mind. And then they changed the date on us after I'd already scheduled it, which is why we're showing 3 films tomorrow, 4 films tomorrow, which are all about the cinema. We're showing Sunset Boulevard, and we're showing Robert Altman's The Player, and a film called Ladies and Gentlemen, Final Cut, which nobody's ever heard of, but which stars every movie star in the universe. So if you want to come hang out watching films about films, this is the place to be tomorrow, but we are going to charge you full price. Devin, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. This is part 3 of our 5-part series. I think we'll switch over from the Rochefort banner to my computer up there. So I'll continue. But yes, this is also one of my favorite movies ever made. I don't like picking favorites from the series. We're showing 4 films that I absolutely love. Here's a little timeline. But there's movies that make you think, make you feel, and then there's movies that make you laugh and delight. I was once watching The Young Girls of Rochefort with a group of friends, and a friend of mine asked me, "Why are you laughing at it? This isn't, like, these scenes aren't funny. Are you laughing at the movie?" And I said, "No, I'm cackling with delight." And that's the best type of laughter. So if you ever feel moved, it's okay to cackle with delight at this movie. If anyone wants to see the next 2 films, which I wholeheartedly recommend though, next week we're doing 3 Colors Blue, which again, picking one of the 3 Colors movies to say is my favorite is like saying, I like that panel of the Sistine Chapel, but this is my favorite panel of the Sistine Chapel we're showing next week. The week after that, we're showing Emily, which is kind of subtly one of the most important works of the digital age. And yeah, it'll be a fun couple of weeks. For now, though, we are going to talk about The Young Girls of Rochefort, and to talk about The Young Girls of Rochefort, we have to talk about mise en scène, or production design, what's in front of the camera, and to talk about that, we have to talk about what allows that mise en scène to come through. If anyone remembers last week we were talking about Technicolor and prismatic color, right? Technicolor does not have full color film stock. At least inside the camera. Technicolor operates on a beam splitting mechanism. You can see that in the bottom left corner here. And what that mechanism does is it splits a color image coming through the lens into 3 different primaries that are then recorded to 3 different film stocks, all of which are monochrome. A Technicolor negative is that at the top there. You can see it's 3 different monochrome images that are actually recording a certain part of the color spectrum. Those are then combined into a final negative. What makes the next technology we're going to focus on today so important, though, is the fact that with chromogenic color, you get this all in one film stock. These colors emerge via chemical development by dye couplers that are embedded in the silver halide crystals of the film emulsion. And these layers contain yellow, magenta, and cyan, and white silver. The white silver is then bleached out, leaving a full color image. If you want to know what a bleach bypass is, you just skip the step, or part of the step, where you bleach out the silver, getting a higher contrast, lower saturation image. And so this kind of rise of chromogenic film stock marked the end of the Technicolor company's dominance in Hollywood for a whole lot of reasons. There was also a big lawsuit where they lost their patents, which was poorly timed. And so to talk about this type of film stock, though, we need to talk about Kodak, everyone's favorite company. And Kodak became a major force in developing color knowledge across international boundaries throughout the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and onwards, until they totally messed it up during the digital age, but we won't talk about that. And so in the aftermath of World War I, there was a great kind of international cooperation in terms of studies into color imagery and especially color film stocks. And Kodak was at the forefront of this. This is a timeline of their film stocks. We can see on the left there, we have the Eastman Dry Plate Company, founded in 1881, and then some major kind of steps forward in their film stocks. We have Kodachrome, and then in 1915, and then Kodachrome in 1935. These are actually 2 unrelated film stocks. But the 1935 edition of Kodachrome was, in fact, a major step forward, the first mass-produced consumer chromogenic film stock, right? You don't need to have a prism, you don't need 3 film stocks, you can just have it in a camera, right? I think Paul Simon wrote a song about this once. And so by 1950, you had kind of the most significant film stock for the purposes of this talk, which is Eastman Color, which is the first ever mass-produced chromogenic motion picture-ready film stock that was cheap, easy to use. You could use it in any black and white camera, and this was key. The major implications of Eastman Color were not aesthetic, right? Oftentimes we're asked, oh, can we get the Technicolor look these days? I think that's the wrong question to ask. It's what led to the Technicolor aesthetics being sidelined in lieu of the aesthetics we associate with single strip color film, right? And that's what we're talking about today, because Young Girls of Rochefort is not a Technicolor film. It is a chromogenic film. It was shot on a single film stock on very small cameras by a bunch of people in France. And so the major implications of this had to do with what you see on screen. On the left, we have Jack Cardiff helping operate a Technicolor camera. And on the right, we have another unnamed cinematographer operating a camera made by Ari, designed to use both black and white and chromogenic color film stock, right? Which of these do you want to use, right? Which of these is more inviting for a small indie production in France, right? You're probably not going to go with the Technicolor. It also helps that Technicolor, by dint of the beam splitting, had a far lower sensitivity to light. Who here was at Black Narcissus last week? Yeah, a lot of you. That thing was shot on ISO like somewhere between 12 and 25, right? And you can see how much light they had to use. The Young Girls of Rochefort was shot somewhere in the ISO 100 range for most of it. And so, in this film, they could use way fewer lights in interior locations in particular. The other thing that happened was that Technicolor, if anyone remembers the Reign of Terror by Natalie Kalmus and the Technicolor consultants, right, laying down the hammer on all the productions. And they tried to do that in Black Narcissus and it didn't quite work. Well, Now that Eastman color and other film stocks, there was suddenly an explosion of them in the 50s, became widespread. It was anyone's game. You could use basically color in any way you'd like because you didn't have to subscribe to that whole workflow. There were tons of development labs for color, especially by 1968, which is when Young Girls of Rochefort was released. And you could basically, there was way fewer production barriers. With that said, though, if anyone sees this graph behind me here, you can tell that color took a while to become the kind of default state, right? Does anyone here know why there's like a bump there before going right down? Does anyone here know what the heck happened in 1954 and 55? TV. Now, it is often said that one of the big drivers of color film was television, right? It's like widescreen. You got to make them, give the audiences a reason to go out to the cinemas. This was actually not true with regards to color. The widespread adoption of television actually led to a brief, kind of, I was about to say catastrophic, but it's neither here nor there, a brief kind of decline in the amount of color productions. Basically, studios go, wait, why are we spending the extra money to shoot in color when we can't even show it on television? And it took until the mid to late 60s when widespread color TVs became common for color film to become the standard. There were, however, also ideological barriers. If anyone remembers from last class, I'm already in teaching mode, that's frightening, beginning of the semester. But if anyone remembers from last lecture, films like A Matter of Life and Death, and actually that was kind of the odd one out, but films like The Wizard of Oz established color as the spectacular dream world, right? Color was dreams, it was the past, it was spectacle. Color was the exception. If you're shooting in color, you have to motivate it. This actually stuck around for a lot longer than most people think. And it was this gradual process, especially throughout the 1960s, where color became the default state. It took until 1967 for the Academy of Motion Pictures to discontinue separate black and white and color Oscars because it kind of became redundant. And so Eastman color was, and Kodak were incredibly important, and chromogenic film stocks in general. The availability became incredibly important for kind of changing popular ideology around color. And now when someone shoots in color, I'm sure any teachers like me will know, if your student gives you a film that is suddenly in black and white, you ask the question, why is it in black and white now, right? It's an inverse of the way things were in the 40s and 50s, where the question that was asked is, why would we splurge for color? So, a multiplicity of things led to color becoming the quote-unquote default. There's also, the straight up practicality of motion picture film stocks becoming more and more sensitive to light. Again, by 68, Eastman 5254 100T, that's 100 ISO film stock, was the new thing. But by the mid 80s, you have 400 ISO film stock, and nowadays 500 is generally the standard unless you're shooting digital, when it's more often than not 800. So filmmakers were able to make films with less and less in terms of the studio apparatus. So when we talk about, we're going to kind of wind our way to the French New Wave now, and I'm going to talk a bit about different ways in which throughout the mid to late 20th century, color was conceived by various entities and movements. And to do that, we have to talk about the kind of status quo that a lot of these movements were responding to, which was the use of Technicolor by studios in the 40s and 50s. Here are a set of very similar looking stills from 3 very different productions, all under the Freed unit in MGM. But what they all feature is incredibly strident use of poppy tones, right? This is color that wants you to know it's there, right? It really, really insists upon itself. And so, how do we get from that to, I'm going to make sure the audio plays on this.
Oh, Popeye! He's Popeye the Sailor Man. Oh, he's Popeye the Sailor Man. He's come to the fish, 'cause he eats his fish. He's Popeye the Sailor Man.
Oh, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man.
So how did we get from those Technicolor extravaganzas to Robert Altman awkwardly putting Robin Williams in and Shelley Duvall in the only in the only bright colors in this otherwise completely naturalistic scene, right? How do we get there? And the answer is has to do with essentially one of my favorite things, which is trends. It's one of the great ironies, in my opinion, of cinema history that right in the exact moment when color film stock became kind of available to everyone, we saw a great retreat in the stridency of color in popular cinema, especially in America. And so you had cinematographers like Owen Roizman, who shot Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3 in extremely low lighting conditions, using lighting that, if not available, was mimicking available sources and mostly earth tone production design. You had cinematographers like Gordon Willis, who shot this film Clute, taking that a step further and building entire ideologies out of this. A big difference between Roizman and Willis was that Willis was actively ideological in a way that Roizman wasn't interested in. Willis says, see what you're looking at. Don't walk into a situation and remanipulate it. Look at it, right? He wants to work with what's there and to modify it as little as possible, which means essentially, in aesthetic terms, he is trying to mimic the way that these locations actually operate rather than imposing his will upon them. And Hollywood cinematographers throughout the 1970s were extremely willing to engage in these kind of, earth tone kind of exercises in restraint in terms of both lighting and production design. And we can see kind of the, in my opinion, maybe the ne plus ultra of that in my favorite ever film shot in Vancouver, which is McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which, again, is an entire film. It's basically, what if we dragged film through mud and then showed it on both a visual and oral level. It's also my favorite film of the 70s, so, But in this film, they not only production designed, they literally built a town out of the mud. They lit it in a very naturalistic way. Vilmos Zsigmond engaging in his kind of not quite so naturalistic as Gordon Willis, but still pretty toned down lighting. And then manipulated the film stock by pre-flashing it, that is exposing each frame to a little bit of light before shooting, to further tamp down on the colors and contrast. And so, here is a generation of movies that are essentially, for lack of a better word, a little brown. And so how do we get here, right? How do we get to here from Hollywood? And this is where we can loop back to one of the chief influences, or actually a set of chief influences on Hollywood cinematographers of the 70s, and that is the world of world art cinema in the mid-century. And especially among those, the French New Wave, of which Jacques Demy is one of the more prominent members. And so throughout the 1950s and 60s, you had a growing kind of response, especially in France, bubbling up against what Francois Truffaut called the cinéma du papa, often called the tradition of quality. And this was embodied by, frankly, terrific cinema like Jean Renoir's French Can-Can, which is on a lot of levels kind of functionally indistinguishable on a production and visual level from the standards of Hollywood at the time. Big money, a lot of lighting, very bold use of colors, and not a reactionary communist bone in his body, right? And so in response to this, you had a wave of filmmakers such as, I'm going to go through a few here and kind of contrast a few of them because it's impossible to paint all these filmmakers with a single brush. But we had filmmakers such as Eric Rohmer, who in this film, Le Collectionneuse, predominantly relies on bright colors in clothing contrasted against a obstinately naturalistic background. We have scene after scene in which virtually nothing is done to manipulate, at least apparently manipulate, the colors of nature, the colors of the town around our characters. So you have colorful costumes, but really only just, right? Although I do want to throw a little bit of water on this representation of the film. This is a restoration by a specific restoration house known for making everything a little yellow. So the film isn't really this yellow. But as you can see here, these are colorful costumes, but they're still within believability, right? They're still basically representations of what someone in France circa 1966 might have worn. They aren't calling attention to themselves in a way that the costumes in the MGM musicals or French Can-Can would. This is a predominantly naturalistic aesthetic. And again, naturalistic is an aesthetic choice. It isn't like an objective thing. It's based on our expectations for naturalism. That's worth noting. Then we have Jean-Luc Godard, who is, one might say, far less naturalistic. These are all films from Une Femme et un Femme, one of his first color films. And he, throughout his color films in the 1960s, before he kind of went off and did his own thing later on, had a strikingly similar palette. The shots from Une Femme et un Femme don't look really significantly different on a palette level from shots from any of the other films he released during that period as far as his CinemaScope anamorphic color works go. And the explanation for this, I think, lies in Godard's actually his sense of branding. You have Edward Brannigan describing Godard's methods here in a sort of a riposte to people trying to, in his view, kind of overly symbolize these colors. For most critics, this is the sole, or at least paramount way color is interpreted in film. A weaker claim, stemming from this same kind of symbology approach, is that color sets the mood or tone of a scene, vivid colors for a quote-unquote lively scene, and so forth. The essence of this method is to shift adjectives and nouns from the narrative and attach them to the appearance of colors, as in a chromatic sensuality that sharpened the hedonism of the plot. And so he proposes another reading of Godard's use of color, and this is very relevant, I think, for Jacques Demy's use of color in The Young Girls of Rochefort. In Godard's early color films, the reds, whites, blues, and yellows can perhaps be seen as primarily a graphic phenomenon. They give his films an intertextual identity, identifying them as the work of an individual auteur. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the film's standardized title sequences, you can see in the bottom right corner there, comprising red, white, and blue sans serif text on a black background, immediately announcing itself that we are watching a Jean-Luc Godard film. Despite his radical leanings, Godard was one of the 1960s greatest brand strategists. And so this is color as a way of separating oneself from others, creating an intertextual continuity in one's own work. We can see shades of this in Jacques Demy's work in his previous film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which follows, I'm going to play 3 clips from it and kind of talk about them. It follows a young couple who are split apart by the war and end up in different relationships. And it's kind of left to us, the audience, to kind of figure out how happy they are in those relationships. I'm going to play one clip from the beginning of the film where our 2 leads go dancing. So we can immediately see an association of not just red, but bright, primary, bold colors with this sort of young and impassioned relationship that our 2 leads share. And let's compare that to another scene in which a relationship is formed.
Elle accepte puisque la situation dans laquelle elle se trouve ne vous effraie
We can see the comparative lack of bold colors here, right? It's almost entirely monochromatic. And we can see Demi here is not dogmatic with his colors. There's still bright colors here. The film still has an overarching aesthetic overtone, but the tone of the scene is, in comparison to the scene we just saw, comparatively monochromatic, especially with regards to Deneuve and Roland's costumes. And then we're about to see another character show up here. And this character and her treatment within the film is, I think, particularly interesting to me. A second, let me do the jockeying desktops thing. Madeleine in this film is given kind of two central motifs. One is that she, unlike the leads, often dresses in secondary colors, mixes of colors. It's a more toned down palette. Notice how she's wearing a green jacket here. And Michel Legrand's score, which I could talk for an hour about the score, gives her more kind of minor key, nuanced, more almost mature sounding musical motifs to match this. And the takeaway here is that her connection with our co-lead on the right here is a more less overtly romantic, but maybe just as valuable connection, one that is more mature. And we can see that all, and we can actually see that shades of that in Deneuve's character's mother too. And this all kind of comes together in the final scene. And I'm going to play just a bit of that, where we have, once again, a predominantly monochromatic overtone to the scene, juxtaposed against very specifically placed costumes and an SO station. Once again, we have the youthful character in a primary color and the adults in more toned down, more secondary colors. And then, Demi got a lot of blowback for his use of the SO station here. I think it's a little kind of a little wink, right? It doesn't quite play into his wider thematics, but although he does lean into it quite a bit in Rochefort in fun ways. So here we have a very specific deployment of contrast between heavy tones, light tones, primary colors, secondary colors, to create a very basic set of symbology here in a way that Godard was less interested in. The other kind of element of the Young Girls of Rochefort that kind of makes it stick out among the French New Wave films is that it is one of the great examples of painted landscapes in cinema. And I want to contrast it again in that way against two other works. One of which is Antonioni's Red Desert, where in which he famously painted a whole forest blue, and would take these landscapes and take what I would call a heavily interventionist approach, right? In ways that often worked against the bold defining palettes of those places. The way he saw it, here's a quote from him that I find very telling. "I'm forced to modify or eliminate colors as I find them in order to make an acceptable composition. Let's suppose we have a blue sky. Who knows if it's going to work, or if I don't need it, where can I put it? So I pick a gray day for a neutral background where I can insert all the color elements I need. A tree, a house, a ship, a car, a telegraph pole. It's like having a white paper on which to apply colors." And so he sees, even in these wide landscape shots, a need to control every element, to create his own, and this is his own wording, a painting with light, right? He doesn't see the natural world as a necessary starting place. He wants to intervene. And it's interesting, though, and a sign of the times, that by the late 60s, he was making films like Blow Up, which would make heavy use of kind of unintervened natural landscapes. Again, it takes place in a combination of cityscapes, parks, and interiors, all of which are left in a pretty performative, self-conscious way, unadorned. They are not, he's not painting these trees red because he feels like it'll counterbalance the yellow, right? He's leaving them as is to a much greater degree. So even Antonioni kind of ended up working, he's still a creature of his time. He's working with the predominant trends of the time. Then you have a very small indie film, Playtime, by Jacques Tati, in which I want to particularly highlight two things about this film. One, in that this is actually the second film after Napoleon we talked about in this series, which kind of destroyed the French film industry due to cost overruns. So this has been a great. We're not kind to the French in this lecture, no. But Jacques Tati basically built an entire city block in Paris, and in an attempt to create a chromogenic black and white film. Right? Almost all of these frames have the maximal amount of color removed from them. Right? If we take color in 1967 as the default state, he is going, instead of shooting in black and white, he is trying to emulate the kind of black and white affect of which he would have known it as an affect at that time, insofar as he can, using color film stock. But I want to point out, and again, the thematics here, for those of you who haven't seen the film, are a kind of satirical approach to a futuristic Paris where nature has been sidelined, right? And the kind of the central elements of Paris are only ever depicted in kind of, frames within frames, reflections. I do want to actually talk about green again, though, because green pops up here and there in this film in very specific ways, right? We have this optical green, the green lighting, creating this sickly green, almost parody of the color green due to the, the typical European pharmacy sign. But we also have one more appearance of green in the film, which is our American tourist's dress. And at one point, someone addresses her and says, "Oh, that's passé." That color is passé. And if you'll notice, the only two characters in this scene wearing earth tones are her and Monsieur Hulot in the foreground there, who we're seeing the back of. And, this is never explicitly made clear in the film, but they share a connection, a connection to the world before it turned gray. And so green in Demi's film means something very different than green in Playtime. And that's where we get to Rochefort. And I'm actually not going to talk a whole ton about Rochefort, because I'd much rather us all arrive at our own conclusions with the toolkit I've hopefully assembled a little here. But I think that in Demi's own words, which I'm actually going to play right now, and I'll riff on them in a second.
L'anecdote, pour moi, ne compte pas. C'est un sentiment général. C'est un moment de vie. Ce sont des moments d'une existence comme ça. On pourrait appeler comme ça des scènes de la vie de province.
And so Demi in The Young Girls of Rochefort explicitly says the plot doesn't matter to him, which I think is a good and healthy way to approach cinema. But as far as this kind of approach to color goes, this is a highly interventionist film. They famously, and I highly recommend Agnes Varda's documentary, The Young Girls Turn 25, for a more full exploration of this. But he painted entire city blocks, including the entire town square of the town of Rochefort, these bright pastel colors, right? The town is very gray. I Google Mapped it, I've seen it, it's very gray. But in Jacques Demi's film, it's this wonderland of pastel, perfectly tailored colors. And I have, in prepping for this lecture, I rewatched the film twice, desperately trying to make sense of them. I failed. And I think that part of why this film resists symbolic readings is that, similar to Jean-Luc Godard, Demi here is, at least in this own person's opinion, is operating primarily in a graphic mode, right? He is creating compositions that give him certain moods. They please him. And so throughout this film, I invite everyone here to try and make sense of, okay, who's pink, who's yellow, who is blue, and try and draw those lines. And this film really goes out of its way to resist patterns in that way. Characters swap colors constantly. And it feels as if the colors here are far more concerned with just, hey, does this look amazing? Does this actually create interesting worlds through which our characters can walk through? Does this serve the overarching tone of any given scene? Or in some cases, does it ironically work against it, right? Denis is playing around here in a way that he wasn't with The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Because Umbrellas of Cherbourg is a fundamentally, I think, a serious film. It's a film that deals with heartbreak, loss. This is a fundamentally, and I mean this with as the highest praise I can give a film, it's a fundamentally silly movie. It's a film that is concerned with Demi making a film that I think, Demi making a film that pleases him personally, and I think that's the highest, maybe that's even the highest cinema can aim for. So that's kind of my rant on chromogenic color and surface color. Next week, we're going to talk about filtration, because we're going to talk about some really wacky Polish people who decided to put 10 filters in front of a map box and get really drunk. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And I think I have about 6 minutes in which to ask for questions. Does anyone here have questions they'd like to ask? We have I think someone with a microphone up there who can give you amplification. We have someone in the back there.
It's not a question, but I wanted to say from the very first lecture, you explained the difference between tonal and tinting, right?
Mm-hmm.
I saw a film on Turner Classic Movies the other night called Portrait of Jenny, I think, and they actually used tonal. There's a scene, an entire waves crashing against the lighthouse. It's this dark, dark green. Then the following morning, there's this rose tone to the scene, but it's definitely tonal. But I just want to thank you for, I come to your lecture and I learned something and I saw an example of it right away. So I just really want to say how much I appreciate what you've been telling us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm actually, we're literally last night, I was showing Portrait of Jenny, parts of it to my wife, and that ending with the storm and the toning is a technical marvel. I would also add that that's one of Hollywood's first experiments with surround sound. So may want to play it in here, because I think there's 2 channels. There's a front and a back channel. It's pretty fun. It's wild. But yes, that movie is insane. Any further questions? Yes.
I'm interested in how the color movement is, but I'm also interested how now lots of directors have now moved to going back to black and white. And I'm finding that sometimes I enjoy the black and white because of the shading and the shadows and how you can do it, rather than doing it in color. And I'm just wondering your comment on that. What made them decide?
I think a lot of so many things in art and life can be boiled down to because we can now. Right? And so, I mean, to me, when I want to shoot in black and white, if I even want to monitor on set in black and white, I just throw on a black and white lookup table on my camera so I can see it in black and white on the day. And I can shoot black and white with far more accuracy and confidence than anyone could in any period in history before me. And I think that does encourage a certain amount of experimentation, which is part of what, that's part of why, to me, the digital era is so exciting and why I will never show on film again, because I find the open possibilities of it. It's a completely unchained medium in a way that film is fundamentally chained to its chemistry. So I find digital much more exciting. And that's one of the reasons why you can do that. I can tint in like 5 seconds on this computer. I did in the first lecture, right? I just added tint to a scene. That cost money back in the day. It's quite something. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. Oh, good.
I'm going to model good behavior and actually wait for the microphone. Just thinking about young girls of Rochefort, I don't know if Demi talked about this, but clearly we know that even as a child, he fell in love with Hollywood musicals. So his use of color in this film is in some ways an homage to those 50s Technicolor Freed movies. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that.
That's a very good point, and I think this film was actually controversial among the French New Wave filmmakers, especially the Godards and Truffauts of the world, who are true kind of radicals politically. This film is almost it's almost a countercultural film in the sense that Demis here is, instead of going, what the zig was at the time, which was let's do away with the Hollywood tradition of quality, let's make films on 16mm cameras handheld in the middle of the Parisian street, he's going, no, I'm going to try my best to just not mimic, but make my own spin on the toolkit that Hollywood was using 15 years before. And this includes hiring certain specific Hollywood actors I'm not going to spoil. And so Demis is throughout this film specifically referencing Hollywood films, but I think in key ways he's tweaking them. He is turning certain elements of the musical, when characters break into song, kind of non-diegetically. This film makes them weird. There are many, many scenes in this film where characters will, in deliberately stilted, awkward ways, break into song, or the choreography during the song will be deliberately kind of off-kilter from what one might expect. And this applies to the colors as well. The colors are often, they're often kind of, whimsical in a way that something like The Bandwagon even wasn't. He's doing things to kind of call attention to the artifice here. So again, it's still in its DNA, I think, a French New Wave film, but it is Demis going, okay, here's what I value out of Hollywood. Here's what I value in the films of my contemporaries, and now I'm going to make my own perfect version of that. And that's kind of the project he's engaging with here, in a way that he wasn't with Cherbourg. Cherbourg is its own, also deeply weird thing, but I don't see it as indebted to the free unit musicals of the 40s and 50s. All right, we have one more if anyone wants. Otherwise, I'm gonna start our 5-minute break. All right, I don't see anyone. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you next week, and I'll be here for the movie. It's gonna be a wild one. It'll be good.